There we go. Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to everybody on the staff, of the people, and all our tremendous volunteers. We are a volunteer-based organization, and thanks to everybody who made the time to join us tonight. Uh, I'll jump right into it. You said conversation. We're in a week of conversation, and I really can't, for what we're talking about tonight, I can't imagine a more propitious time for our conversation than right now. For a couple of reasons. Number one, in terms of Katie, our beloved founder and director and spiritual leader. If anybody ever had a doubt as to the fact that what they did in Michigan was the correct diagnosis of the problem, and that they did a fantastic job of carrying out the cure against all odds to make sure it was absolutely effective. As of last November, I think that issue is absolutely resolved. So we've got a great example in front of us. If you haven't seen the movie Slay the Dragon, please make sure, do yourself a favor and make sure to do so. It's a really beautiful example of what's possible with volunteer power and mobilizing and all that. Also, our form of government, Democratic Republic, representative democracy, it's increasingly clear that as going back to the Michigan example, they talk about voters, not politicians, and that in the case of gerrymandering in particular, that voters ought to pick the political representatives and not the opposite. And we come at a time now where we're seeing this divergence increasingly between what all the polls tell us the people really crave and want, and the resolution of important issues like gun violence is one. And on the other hand, the political leaders have their own interests and something else is happening there. So we come to the point where you can do so much electing the representatives, but when you find that method is wanting, there is a safety valve, and it's not available, unfortunately, to all of our states, but there is a safety valve that's available called the ballot initiative. And that requires getting signatures, getting an issue on the ballot. And as having talked with Michael and Drey and company, you have to go through some machinations, but there is that device available. And it's even then, once you pass it, if you don't do it correctly and do the follow through, people find a way to interfere with that. But it is a device that's available to us. So tonight we have an opportunity to discuss that and share each other's experiences and see what we can find out. I'm going to take just a minute to give a quick background on the people. Following on that Michigan experience, a handful of folks got together, went across the country to recruit representatives and people to participate, and ended up getting people from all states in the union and getting them to DC, where everybody sat for days and painstakingly went through the ins and outs. And this is more people than it took to write the Constitution. It wasn't easy, but we came out with a pledge that we signed and unveiled on the steps of the Lincoln Monument, and it was quite a deal, and we're still going. For the Voting Rights Committee, very quickly, very proud to have worked with Kathy during the 2020 election on something we called the SAFE Challenge. Faced with the obstacle of the COVID, we said, this is an opportunity to let people see how really the possibilities of voting at home with information from the Vote at Home initiative, and that not only is it safer to vote at home, more convenient, and the turnout actually went up for voters across the board, but particularly close to my heart, young voters. And so it started to trend, and we were able to see some possibilities there. One more thing, in response to the really disgusting violence and threats and menacing that we saw here in Phoenix, we saw at where the election workers were just counting ballots, and also at the polls with AR-15s, we coined a phrase called peace at the polls. And I think that's still something that's critical. Obviously, quite obviously to me, our electoral process should take place in an atmosphere of peace. So we keep working on a lot of other things, and we'll continue to do that with your help. Quick disclaimer: in my day job, I'm the national field director for an outfit called La Machine. We do candidate and issue campaigns both throughout Arizona and across the country. And last year, I'll say one thing: we were able to register over 17,000 people just here in Arizona, many of them young and first-time voters. So that little thing. But we're really happy. I went to a open primaries session such as this, and out of that, I was glad that Drey contacted me. I was able to talk to Michael and made two friends. I felt we had some good conversations. And I said, when you have good, genuine, sincere people like this, that you can have an honest conversation with, you learn things. And so that helped give rise to our format here this evening. We're glad to have them here and a really great panel. By the way, as you'll see, David is a very, very good host. He's very, very good at that aspect. So we're very appreciative of this wonderful panel. We do have it set up so that not only will you have the chance to pose questions in the chat, but also we'll have a small group session, which gives a different feel to it, where you have the opportunity toward the end of our hour this evening to be in a small group and talk this over with a group of new friends. So with that, thank you all for being here. We look forward to tonight's session, and welcome to the marvelous and wonderful David Valente.
Hey, thanks, Mike. So let's start by introducing myself. I'm Dave Valente, host of the internationally unknown podcast, The Political Deep Dive, on Sunday nights, and a board member, or not a board, former board member of the People. And it's been my pleasure to host these town halls with everyone here. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. Ballot initiatives are, I think, a fundamental returning of the power to the people, and we want to inform people how the process of doing ballot initiatives, where it's available, and picking the brains of people who have done it and are in the midst of doing it. So tonight I'll have our first guests introduce themselves and talk about their project. The first person we're going to talk to is Joe Kirby. He's a former businessman in the Sioux Falls, South Dakota area, and he is the chair of South Dakota Open Primaries. Make sure I get that Open Primaries Ballot Initiative. So Joe, please introduce yourself and talk about your project.
David, yeah, Joe Kirby. We have found in South Dakota, what many of you have already found, that Americans don't appreciate the extent to which their institutions determine their politics. It is time to reevaluate some of those institutions, most notably the primary election system. Primary elections are partisan, where they produce partisan results. So we're introducing top 2 open primaries in South Dakota. Tomorrow, we begin our signature drive. We need 50,000 signatures to put this on the 2024 ballot. We have a great group of a couple dozen strong supporters around the state put together. We're pretty confident between our volunteer signature drive plus some paid petition carriers, we're going to get enough signatures filed by this time next year so that we're on the ballot in November of 2024.
Excellent. You said 50,000 petition signatures. Is that with the buffer? Because one thing people may not understand is when you do petition signatures, you have to get a buffer because they do validation of those petition signatures.
Yes, 10% of the voters in the last gubernatorial election is 35,000, so we have a buffer.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right. Let's talk with Drey Samuelson, who's a former chief of staff for Tim Johnson, who's also on the South Dakota Open Primaries, Open Primaries Ballot Initiative. Drey, tell us about yourself and what you're involved with. I believe you're on mute.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, I grew up in a rural farm town in northeastern Nebraska, only a stone's throw most from South Dakota. I spent my adult life in politics mostly. I spent 3 years working for Tom Daschle, and then I spent 28 years working for Senator Tim Johnson. I was the only chief of staff that he ever had in his entire 28 years in both the House and the Senate. And I think I'm the living example of the Peter Principle, if you know what that is. So I'm very grateful to the people for putting this critically important forum on ballot initiatives together. It's clear that the quickest and in many cases, the only route to political reform in this country is direct democracy, which allows everyday folks like us to take our case directly to our fellow citizens and to bypass legislative bodies, which are often little more than defenders of a corrupt status quo. My first experience with the ballot initiative was in 1982, when I was hired by Nebraska Farmers Union to run a constitutional amendment initiative to outlaw non-family farm corporations from buying more Nebraska farmland, or from expanding their livestock operations. Farmers Union had tried for years to get a very mild prohibition through the Nebraska legislature, but with no luck. But once the decision was made to go the initiative route, the game suddenly changed. And by dint of organizing our butts off, using only volunteers, we gathered 62,000 signatures in 3.5 months, and we put it on the ballot. Now, that's a slow process by what Katie did, but it amazed us because we weren't at all sure we were going to get it done, but we did. Our opponents, big out-of-state insurance companies, and essentially the entire Nebraska establishment, all of a sudden started to take us seriously and vowed to spend whatever it took to beat us. And they weren't kidding either, as we had little money and we were outspent 13-1. You get outspent 2-1 in politics, you feel it. You get outspent 13-1 and you're like gasping for air on the ground. But yet we prevailed. We won by an astonishing 56% to 44%. I learned then the immense potential power of taking your case directly to the people. And in fact, the really excellent film, as Michael mentioned, Slay the Dragon, about Katie and her group's redistricting triumph in Michigan, proves the case very persuasively. If you've seen the film, then you know that in addition to passage of redistricting reform in Michigan, it also focuses on the defeat in Wisconsin of a legal challenge to the terribly gerrymandered legislative boundaries in that state. The difference? Michigan allows ballot initiatives and Wisconsin doesn't, pure and simple. Unfortunately, only about 25 states allow ballot initiatives, as Mike referenced, and the last one to authorize them was Illinois 52 years ago. That needs to change. It's my view that in addition to using ballot initiatives to fix our political system, reformers should also at least consider trying to convince targeted state legislatures to return some power to the people. What they should do is authorize ballot initiatives as a way to pass legislation and institute constitutional amendments. It seems to me that Wisconsin would be a prime target, especially with the recent change in that state's Supreme Court. But there are other states too, maybe Iowa, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, maybe Virginia. I have no illusions that doing this would be easy. It wouldn't be. But I'm convinced that it would be possible. People are understandably fed up with the political status quo. And I believe that the kindling is there waiting. We only need someone or some group to strike the match. It was Daniel Burnham who over 100 years ago said, quote, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir people's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble, logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we are gone will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Remember that our children and grandchildren are going to do things that would stagger us. Let your watchword be order and your beacon beauty." It's at least something to consider, or so I believe, and I think it would be great if the people gave it some thought. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Next, joining us tonight is Michael Calcagno from he's the board chair and chief petitioner, which as somebody who's done petitioning before, that is an important job for all Oregon votes. Tell us about your project.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And thanks to the people for hosting this great event, and independentvoting.org for being a part of it as well. I'm so grateful to have a chance to speak with you all. My name is Michael, and I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a working dad, so this is just a volunteer role for me. I have a day job, but I think that this is such an important cause. And one of the most profound statistics I'll share is that a recent poll showed that 75% of Oregonians say they're worried about their future. Full stop, right? So 3 out of 4 Oregonians are worried about their future, and nearly as many say that our form of democracy is in peril. So I think there's a correlation there, right, between how people feel about our representative democracy and how the public sector is serving the needs of the public, and how people are feeling about their future, right? And I think that we live in very trying times. We have so many difficult circumstances and situations facing us. I love Oregon. It's my home state, and I'm very proud to be from Oregon, but we have some severe issues. So the highest rate of mental health disease in the nation, the worst availability of access to substance abuse treatment programs, the lowest availability of hospital beds per capita nationwide, the third highest rate of homelessness. We rank 44th in all states in public education performance. This is a postcard not to move to Oregon, right? But what I'm trying to communicate is that we have significant problems that have been long festering in our state, and they're not being solved. And I think that when people are, filling out their ballot, they are filling it out with the hope that elected officials will work on finding common ground and solving problems. And they just don't. They just don't. And it's because we have perverse incentives that reward doctrinaire, dogmatic, extreme rhetoric, right? We punish, right? The party primary, partisan politics, it punishes elected officials who compromise. It punishes elected officials who try to find common ground and solve solutions. So our system is completely rigged to completely disincentivize the folks who want to find solutions. So we see an exodus of those common ground elected officials. And what does that leave? Well, it leaves the hyper-partisan, polarized folks in office. And in order to keep power and retain their position in their reelection, are they appealing to the general election voter? Not in the slightest, right? Because in states that, like Oregon, still has partisan redistricting, okay, so gerrymandering is a huge problem in Oregon. The elections are decided in the primary, right? And elected officials are not dummies. They realize that if an election is decided in the primary, I need to appeal to the more ideological voter in the primary. So I lead a group called All Oregon Votes, and we've identified the closed partisan primary as the most significant reform that we can focus on in Oregon. We are a ballot measure state, and so we are pursuing a statewide constitutional amendment to repeal the closed party primary. And we're very, very excited to be working on this issue, to be bringing it to the forefront. And I'm really excited to engage with folks tonight and answer any questions. One thing I'll say before I yield the floor here is simply for the fact that I try to put things in historical context. Growing up, I practically was raised by my grandparents. My grandpa recently passed away, and he was someone very dear to me. But it was his grandfather who immigrated to America from Italy, right? So it was the early 1900s. The grandfather of my grandfather gets on a ship from Italy to Oregon, and we had just adopted the right of the citizen to propose an initiative petition, right? So in the early 1900s, my great-great-grandfather Joe, who was living in the Italian caste system, right, an aristocracy, moves from that system where the station you're born into in life is the only station you'll be at in life. And it's the only station that your children can hope to be in life. And he comes to America, which is the land of opportunity, right? And it kind of is trite today because in some respects, have we returned to a Gilded Age? Have we returned to a caste system? Have we returned to a system in which democracy is not working and there is not opportunity for folks to improve their station in life? Upward mobility is the American dream, and we're seeing a complete stagnation of that upward mobility. And I think it's because we have a very broken democracy that needs to be fixed. Toot sweet.
Excellent.
That's not Italian.
So let's move on to our final guest, and it's someone who's no stranger to all of us here. She's the woman, the myth, the legend, Katie Fahey. She is the actress on Slay the Dragon, the lead, and is the executive director of the people and did Voters Not Politicians successfully petitioning the state of Michigan to change its laws to allow for nonpartisan redistricting. Katie, thank you for joining us, and tell us about yourself and tell us about what we're doing here at the People.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you. And I love seeing in the chat how many people have been involved in ballot initiatives, are currently pursuing ballot initiatives. This is the way we get accountability in our system, which I think all of the other speakers have articulated very clearly. So excited to be here. I made a Facebook post a couple years ago that said, hey, I want to end gerrymandering in Michigan. If you want to help, let me know, smiley face. And part of why I did that was I did not want to go to Thanksgiving dinner. My family was arguing about who they were going to vote for. And all I kept hearing was that they actually agreed on a lot of the same things, but they were acting like the only way to get accountability was by voting for president, when I knew that there were other systemic issues, like how our political boundaries are drawn by politicians getting to literally choose their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. And I thought, you know what? Maybe there's a way to find common ground here, and maybe it's through ending gerrymandering. Turns out nobody in my family knew what the heck gerrymandering was. So that Thanksgiving was still really bad, but the next Thanksgiving was pretty good. In Michigan, I made this Facebook post, a bunch of people contacted us, and I started trying to figure out like, what can we actually do about this, which is when I figured out Michigan has the citizen ballot initiative process. Now, I voted, but my background was not in politics at all. I actually had no interest in it because I was an independent voter, and the only opportunities I saw for getting involved in the political process were hyper-partisan. They were, you either have to be a really full-fledged Democrat or Republican, and you got to fight like heck only for your side. But we started organizing, and with all volunteers, we realized that we could write constitutional language. So we went across the entire state to gather input on what do we want for a redistricting process? Do we like the status quo? Do we want something different? We then had to gather at least 315,654 registered Michigan voter signatures in 180 days. We were able to gather 428,000 signatures in 110 days, and the only ballot initiative to gather signatures from all 83 Michigan counties. In Michigan, we don't have a requirement for where geographically those signatures come from. Some states with their ballot initiative process do, but we were excited by that because it meant that there was actually buy-in from the voters across our entire state. This wasn't just a blue-red, this was a Michiganders kind of thing. And then when we put this up to vote in 2018, we overwhelmingly had it pass. It's the only time I think that civics is more popular than weed. We also had marijuana on the ballot, and we speed it out a little bit. We had a couple of more yes votes than marijuana legalization did. So it's pretty exciting. And the really cool part was then in 2020, when there's this horrible pandemic going on, the first time ever we actually get to have an independent citizens redistricting process. And part of what was great about this law passing through the ballot initiative process instead of the traditional means is in the middle of the pandemic, where everybody thinks we're just on pause for 2 weeks, but we're also figuring out, is this the end of the world? What's going on? We had to get thousands of people to sign up to be on an independent redistricting commission, something they had never been invited to do before. And then a lot of people still didn't know a lot about. And yet, because we had taken the time to actually go across our state and make sure people knew what this was, there were just under 10,000 people that applied. We had hundreds of thousands of people who ended up participating in the process, saying how they wanted their districts to be drawn. And Michigan had the most fair and competitive elections we've ever had, both in the primary, actually, even though the redistricting changed the districts, but not necessarily the primary process, as well as the general election. Who was in charge in Michigan? The political party switched just barely, which was in line with how people voted. The percentages of how people voted aligned with what seats were allocated. And the coolest part for me was when the new party came into control, their first press release said their top priority was bipartisan legislation. You have not heard that be mentioned in Michigan since before I was alive. It really showed that the incentives were starting to shift. And although I think that politicians are still figuring out how much are they shifting and doing political calculus, because they still, want to be able to make sure they can push their agenda. Every single time that new legislation has been passed, it has had bipartisan support for the most part. I think there's one or two bills that haven't, but you also see that same sentiment reflected where even when the media is trying to say, hey, this is a Democrat thing or this is a Republican thing, the politicians in charge are saying, no, actually, this is a Michigan thing. And just seeing that narrative shift from our politicians has been amazing. So here at the People, when we got started in Michigan, we had no idea what we were doing. There weren't a lot of people to help us. So we really try to help other people figure out how do you navigate the political process to make change. We've helped over 17 other ballot initiatives, whether they're at the state level or even just at the city level. And we hope to help some more. So that's what I'm here to do tonight, is try and provide some insight from what we've learned from that. It's so nice to be with you guys.
Awesome. Awesome. So actually, I'm going to start with you. First question is, what do you believe are the keys to organizing success? Since you're the one who's done it, what are the keys to organizing a successful ballot initiative?
So I really think, and my t-shirt's going to give me away, like you have to start with the people. When I made that Facebook post, something that not everybody knows is on social media or like on Facebook, you can actually see what you've posted years before. And after we started building momentum, I saw on my time hop, like this thing that showed me I had posted almost the exact same Facebook post like 3 years earlier. And like nobody had even liked it. So there was definitely something about like political timing and all that. But at the same time, I had posted that 3 years ago. I also didn't do anything about it because it felt like I was alone, like I was the only one who cared about this. And I think the mistake I had made 3 years earlier was assuming that because nobody validated my random opinion on a Wednesday, that I must be alone. I must be the only one who sees the systemic problems. And I think that that's where sometimes we start on a ballot initiative or we start down, we know that something is like right and that we want to fight for it, but we don't always take time to create that buy-in, to go and talk to our neighbors, to make sure we give other people a chance to say, yes, I believe in this too. And I think one of the other traps that folks can sometimes fall into is they think that it's all about partisanship, when so many times these good governance reforms are focused on nonpartisanship. You want to be actually creating a system that works for all voters. Otherwise, it's just going to be a short-term fix anyways, because whatever party you might like, who knows what they're going to be like or what they're going to be advocating for in 1 year, let alone 5 or 10 years. So if you're fixing the system to just try and keep that party in charge, it's not going to work. And a lot of people are hungry for nonpartisan opportunities to organize. So I would just say, like, take the time to build in hearing from other people. Like, if your idea is that you feel like is the best and you've really thought it through, trust them that they are also smart and intelligent and will want those things too. They will want open primaries, want redistricting, want to get money out of politics. Because I bet they will. Just so often the current political system never gives folks a chance to actually have their opinion heard, or to actually invite them into the process of how do we change this. And with ballot initiatives, you need a lot of people, unless you're really rich. Then sometimes you don't need many people, but you need hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, depending on your state size, of people to sign petitions. And you might need hundreds of thousands, or in our case, millions of people to actually know enough about this to vote yes. And then even after election day, like we saw with redistricting, we needed hundreds of thousands of more people to actually be involved in the process to make sure it worked and that our legislature would do what was put in our constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, as a running a ballot initiative now, what do you need? What do you need from us, from the people of Oregon? What are your needs running a ballot initiative?
Right. So we will begin our signature collection this July, and our signature collection will run from July of 2023 through July of 2024. So we have a 12-month runway to get 160,000 signatures. That's the threshold to qualify a constitutional ballot measure. So we'll need 200,000 because, like you had said, you want a buffer for your valid rate, your validity check. So 200,000 signatures, 12 months, you do the math, we need to collect a certain amount of signatures per month. And so between now and July, we're building capacity, right? We need to put in place the right vendors, the right campaign staff, the right campaign volunteers. But ultimately, I mean, we do have to put fuel in the tank, right? And so, we're running on a shoestring right now. We have no paid staff, and I think that it's hard to pour a foundation without calling a concrete truck, sometimes. And so, how do you pour a foundation without the dollars to pay the concrete truck, right? So it's just that, what we're focused on right now is engaging with political donors, and trying to convince them that this is good for them, right? I mean, it's hard to work within a system in which the political establishment it has been doing just fine, right? And it's hard to engage with folks, especially right now, right, when our economy is what it is and people are very worried about their future, to tap into new small dollar donors. And so I think that the best thing folks in this room could provide is really moral support and intellectual capital, right? I mean, certainly if you want to make a donation, that's great, but intellectual capital and thought leadership is incredibly important. We need more people using their voices to write op-eds, to post on social media, and to contribute to the work that needs to be done. So that we have 1.5 million research projects that we need to get done to put the data together to ensure that we're making a strong case in every legislative district across our state, so that we can really build the momentum that we're going to need to get this done. So
I will say, if you have ideas in the chat land, please feel free to drop ideas about ballot petitioning signatures. The one I will give you is Saturdays at a DMV. The best time to get petition signatures, because there are people sitting in line already mad about what's going on with the government. So best place to get petition signatures are right there. But
and
Joe,
they're unique signatures because people usually don't want to go to the DMV twice, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Joe and Drey, what do you need in South Dakota? What are you looking for? What kind of assistance are you looking for?
We're in the same boat as Oregon. We're looking just to establish connections, increase awareness among the election reform community of what we're doing in South Dakota. We have a great team in state, but we're not a big state in terms of population. We don't have a whole lot of money. So we are going to raise what we can internally to do the paid portion of our drive, but we do need help from major donors outside of South Dakota, and that's what we're looking for ultimately, to not only fund our signature gathering, but also to fund the campaign that will ultimately follow. And we really feel like the stars are aligned right now, because we're a very red state, but the Republican establishment is quietly on our side, because they've been attacked by the people further right than they are. Christine Holm, John Thune, and others have been, they've found people to the right of them running against them in the primaries. So they quietly want us to make politics a little less partisan.
I've got nothing to add to that. That's exactly right.
Excellent. We'll go back to Katie, because you've done it. So what challenges did you face while you were doing doing your ballot initiative? What kind of advice do you give to the gentleman here about the ballot initiative and the road ahead for them?
So many obstacles. But it was all 100% worth it. I think in the beginning, and I don't know if this was because at the time I was 27 and didn't have political background, but we had so many people that told us this was impossible. And so many people who told us nobody will ever care about redistricting. People can't be bothered. They would show us polls saying look, all the polling data shows that people don't care, and all they care is about the economy or whatever else was happening. And the thing that I felt like a lot of those folks who had been working in the political process for a long time, who did really good work, who have passed great things in Michigan, I think the thing that they are missing was being in touch with how it felt to live in the state and feel helpless. We had the Flint water crisis that happened, and going to work every day knowing that children couldn't drink water at schools because they'd been poisoned, and that basically our government wasn't doing anything about it. or even just some of the smaller laws where they were taking away local control and making it so that local citizens couldn't undo what the state level legislature was doing. You know, you just feel frustrated and you feel like, okay, maybe you're telling me it's impossible, but like, what else am I going to do? Like nothing isn't working either. And so I think always remembering that no progress is made when you give up, and no progress is made if you don't try. And I know that sounds really simple, but like there are long days and there's going to be no's and there's going to be plenty of people who tell you again, it's not worth it, whatever. But there are so many more people that care than a lot of people in politics think about, because they're like, oh, we can barely get them to show up to vote, let alone get them to donate money or want to gather signatures. But what they fail to realize, I think sometimes, is so much of politics is just about candidates. And it's just, and if you feel like your candidate is never going to win, or if you feel like even if your candidate wins, but you haven't seen change, of course you feel disillusioned. But inviting people to actually change a law, let alone change a constitution, is freaking exciting. And we should celebrate that. And we should remember that democracy is an exciting process. So even for us, there's these little hurdles that you have to do with the ballot initiative process, like getting your 100-word summary that is going to be on the ballot, like formalized. In Michigan, it's done by the Bureau of Elections. Nobody ever attends those meetings. Those meetings, like maybe there's 5 people at them. We brought 400 people. Our legislature literally had to rent out a conference room because we were like, hey, all these people help gather signatures. We all want to watch this happen. We were cheering, we were toasting, like folks were freaking excited about these 100 words. And what was great is the Bureau of Elections like brought their kids to come watch and be like, look, my job is important. Look, people care. It was very cute. But those kinds of elements, like, again, I think traditionally can sometimes get lost, where you don't celebrate the little successes besides just the major ones, like qualifying for the ballot or getting people to vote yes. I think every time where you start feeling discouraged, just remember how great of a process the ballot initiative process is, and that it is something that is unique, that only half our states get, and find the ways to help celebrate that, and to remind your donors why that's a success too. But of course, like the folks who are fighting for that, it's a great opportunity for press. You always want to be going into the media as much as possible to remind people, like, hey, in my case, gerrymandering sucks. Yeah, we probably wouldn't say that to the press, but I'll say it here. Gerrymandering sucks, and there's an alternative. And like, you have to keep telling people and reminding them too how important it is that this will not happen unless thousands of us get involved to make it happen.
Yeah. So what, Michael, Joe, or Drey, what do you anticipate are going to be the obstacles within your states?
Money. Will we run out of money? Will we find national donors that provide adequate support? Just to get ourselves on the ballot, we need a significant amount of money. We figure every signature costs about $10. So we got to get 50,000 signatures. That's a pretty big budget for South Dakota.
I'm very interested in what Katie's was able to do in Michigan. I mean, if we could do it and save a lot of money, that would be wonderful. I can't even hardly imagine that you did what you did, but you did. So I want to find out more about how you did all that, because that's remarkable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, right? I think that when I think about volunteer signature gathering, when I think about folks that have the capacity to volunteer, right? And connecting with those folks that have the capacity to volunteer. And certainly when the economy is doing better, perhaps people have more flexibility with their time in terms of their livelihood. And when the economy is doing worse, people have a lot less flexibility with how they spend their time. And thus, maybe in a down economy, you have to rely more on paid signature gathering. I don't know, Katie, if you have any thoughts on that dynamic.
I definitely think that's true. I mean, it is such a privilege to be able to have enough time to gather signatures. I think, kind of responding to both questions, you always want to think about your allies. And sometimes there are non-traditional allies. Like, we had to go to a lot of organizations that have nothing to do with politics or nonpartisan reforms and help them understand that if we could actually change this issue, it will help their agenda in the state also move forward, even if there's a lot of things we didn't agree on. So, for example, one of the first organizations that actually endorsed us was the Sierra Club, which traditionally looks at environmental issues. Now, a lot of people want to be like, redistricting Sierra Club, what does that mean? What does that look like? But they recognized that they weren't going to pass any legislation in Michigan around redistricting unless they actually had more accountability from politicians having to listen to their constituents, because they had the data showing their constituents wanted this to be a priority. Now, the great part about that happening is the Sierra Club was hiring summer interns, and they actually devoted one to helping with our social media. You know, they still worked for the Sierra Club, but they donated some of their services and time to do that. They also already had a canvassing program where they were going around different neighborhoods, helping them talk about cancer rates in the community, as well as like clean water and access to that as well. And they were willing to then talk to and add a talking point about redistricting and to see if people wanted to be gathering signatures, that kind of thing. We also, as like a completely different example, there was a small shop in rural Michigan that was a sewing shop, like knitting, like they sold yarn. And they endorsed us, and on their sign outside of their yarn store, it said, "Come sign the petition for Voters Not Politicians." And they had their little like literal knitting circle, like a lot of really lovely people who wanted to have an education presentation about that. And then each of them ended up donating like at least $5 and wanting to gather signatures. And even if they could just go to their immediate family and friends, like taking it piece by piece, even those smallest endorsements, and recognizing there was value and having a way for them to plug into the campaign actually ended up helping us a ton. And it wasn't a traditional necessarily way that is organized. And hopping to the fundraising question just really quick, I do think that you do need major donors. I mean, for us, our campaign to be successful in Michigan, we ended up having to raise $17 million. The first year and a half of our campaign, which was just under 2 years, we had only raised about $2 million, but that was all from individual donors, which is pretty huge. We had 33 times more individual donors than any other campaign that year for a ballot initiative campaign. And the way we did that is we were just really honest and transparent. So when we needed to print petitions, we let people know it's going to cost us $40,000 just for this paper, which is crazy because like I didn't just have $40,000 laying around. But then we would start to break it down to say, okay, and we've got 5,000 volunteers right now. Don't check my math because I'm just like, these are not the actual numbers, but like we have 5,000 volunteers right now. If each of us could find 10 people, to donate $10 overnight, we could pay for these petitions, pay for a lawyer, and pay for some yard signs, which everybody wanted, which is just a funny organizer joke. But that kind of stuff worked, and we would do example social media messages where I was the first one who went and appealed to my friends and did a like Facebook live video, or on social media you can sometimes just record a video. Maybe you guys have seen TikToks and stuff. And I just broke it down, explained, made it really easy for people to click on the link. But by doing that work and providing those examples and helping volunteers understand how they could reach their networks, that really helped us get through that first signature gathering phase. Once we started showing that we could gather signatures, a lot of donors then built more confidence in us and were more willing to give, but it took a while for sure.
Well, our time is burned through. So we'll move right into the small group discussion. So
it's around motivation. Did I catch that correctly?
Well, how it's really how do you get 50,000 or how do you get enough volunteers to get that signature threshold?
So one of the things we did that might not be appropriate for the phases that the other two campaigns are already at, but that I just cannot swear enough by, is before we even finalized what our language is going to be for going on the ballot, we started with talking to people first and asking their input. And we had a transparent process that meant that like whatever input they gave, we were going to actually listen to. And we were going to work to actually talk to enough people of Michigan so that it was representative. We were tracking who were we talking to, what were their ages, different demographics, what part of the state were they from. So we actually did 33 town halls is what we called them in 33 days, where we went around and we talked to local media. We tried to talk to local social media groups and invited as many people as possible, saying, hey, we're going to go do this ballot initiative no matter what, but what do you think should actually be in it regarding redistricting? We still had our topic and everything. And at those meetings, what we did is we broke down like, what the heck is redistricting? What does it look like in other states? What could it look like in Michigan? And then how do we actually make this happen? And the last part of how do we actually make this happen was so important because so many people didn't actually know we had a ballot initiative process, and or they had been involved with a ballot initiative process that hadn't been successful. In Michigan, we can do a constitutional amendment or like just change a state law. And a lot of people go after just changing the state law because it requires less resources. You don't need to gather as many signatures. Part of the problem, it's still a really great method, but part of the problem with it is our state legislature could actually overturn those even if people had voted on them. And so because that had been the strategy most often, a lot of people are like, I just spent a year helping gather signatures to undo, for example, the emergency manager law, which led to the Flint water crisis later. And that just got overturned by our legislature. It was their first thing they did when they got back into office. So we had a huge education campaign about like how if you did it through a constitutional amendment, the only way to overturn that is with another constitutional amendment, which would require over 50% of the people of Michigan to vote to get rid of it, which is a huge hurdle, the one we had to meet. And by taking the time to do that, and then by also taking the time to let people have different opinions, like we had folks like politely arguing about how they wanted the redistricting process to look like, by showing a positive experience with the democratic process of like, hey, we can get in a room and talk about this and figure out how we want to move forward together. People were really motivated. They saw that we were willing to actually listen to them, and also that we were everyday people just like them, but also that like they knew that the steps were 1, write constitutional language, 2, gather a bunch of signatures, 3, get people to vote yes on the ballot. And without any of those steps, we couldn't be successful. And in each of those meetings, we also explained we need at least 4,000 people who are able to gather 17 signatures a week for 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it was, or we can't do this. So can you at least sign up and give us that much time? And that really made a difference. And then the other part I will say is once we got volunteers, you have to engage them right away. Sometimes you're waiting for this magic number of like 500 volunteers or 10,000 volunteers or whatever, but people are motivated in a moment for a certain reason to do something that isn't just watching Netflix at night. And instead they're attending a meeting like this one, wanting to talk about ballot initiatives. Nothing's wrong with Netflix. Like I need my downtime too. But the thing is, you have to capitalize on like that motivation and whatever's helping them feel compelled and help them feel like they belong and have a place to plug in. So one of the things we did was we made sure that anybody who signed up got immediately paired with a volunteer leader who could call them within 24 hours to really learn about them, why they wanted to volunteer, and plug them in. My last piece of advice I would just say is we also allowed our plans to be customizable to the local region. So in more rural Michigan, folks were like, we have to go to the tractor pull contest. And I was like, what is a tractor pull contest? Well, do people actually show up to that? I don't know. And then in like Detroit, they were like, well, no, you've got to go to like the Arts, Beats and Eats Festival. Like, and traditionally, I think some of those people were apprehensive to even bring up those ideas because they had been told no before, that like there wasn't going to be enough people there again. But by listening to folks and letting them kind of like customize what gathering signatures would look like and trusting their knowledge that they know the newspapers that are going to get the word out, they know the events that are going to be more well attended, like that actually worked to our advantage. And it takes kind of a decentralized leadership structure in a little bit of a way, because you don't want to let people just go do whatever they want, because there are illegal ways that you can gather signatures and you want quality control. You never want to be misleading the public. But by coming up with ways where a lot of people could contribute their ideas and you could get quick approval processes, we were able to kind of be nimble enough to really go with when opportunities were popping up.
Excellent. Mike, you led a group. What question do you have out of your group? You're on mute.
I had a comment I
Yeah.
wanted to chime in on oh, yeah, it was me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. One thing, of course, at the end of the day, it's valid signatures. And with our organization, I found a real simple thing. We're a family-based organization, and turns out the founder's mother is a really good auditor. And so what we do at the end of every day, I would pack up all the petitions we got completed, run it over to her, and she might as well have had a green shade hat on. And she would go through that on a daily basis and give us very quick feedback. And by God, if somebody was getting sloppy and doing some crappy petitions, we knew about it by the next day. And it's better to do that rather than just wait or hope. We had one candidate that we rescued who had found out somebody had helped her. Only 10% of the signatures were valid. So a wonderful candidate almost didn't make the ballot. And but the other thing is, beside giving you that feedback, then everybody in the organization, all the canvassers realize that, oh, this validity really is a thing. And so they realize that in terms of knocking the doors, going to the places, getting the signatures, but also that they share the responsibility to make sure that we're all doing it right and getting valid signatures that at the end of the day are going to count. Otherwise, you waste a lot of time getting signatures that aren't going to do you any good.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions for the group?
My group, we talked about, just how it can be very challenging getting enough people to be part of your movement, even if it's something most people agree with. Like, you just need a lot of people power. So just kind of the complexity of that and paid versus unpaid, like what can you afford? I think it's just kind of like an overarching question. How do we take something that even is a very strong movement, but make it happen quickly enough that you get signatures that you need? Maybe like for some of these states, you need it in 3 or 4 months. You need to gather all those signatures. So it's kind of like the question is like people will just want to know tips. Like, what can you do to expedite this process?
Hate to take up more. I just think the more organized you can be, the better, which might sound like a way oversimplified answer. But one of the things we did is because we started getting volunteers.
Oh, I think we lost Katie. I don't know if everybody else sees it froze. All right. Well,
that was really frustrating to some people.
There she is. There
They
she is.
started to do. Oh no, sorry. So what we started to do, I don't know if my internet's still unstable, but was try and do regional teams as quickly as possible who could start plugging in and building their teams even before we could gather signatures. And they started creating those local lists of events where we had a rough estimate of we're probably going to be able to start gathering signatures in May. So like, how do we start identifying those events now and getting people signed up now? How do we start working with other organizers? How do we start working with local businesses to make sure they understand if they can gather signatures and what the laws are required to that? Having a training program. So I think the earlier you can have kind of those like, what is step 1, 2, 3 from getting somebody to say, yes, I'm willing to stand on a street corner, to them getting trained, materials in hand, and then signed up for their first shift, let alone second and third shift, the better. And I think sometimes it's overlooked because people are like, oh, well, we aren't going to start gathering signatures for 2 more months, so there's nothing we can do. But that is the opposite of the case. You can always be organizing and getting ready for steps 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Awesome. Before we lose everybody, let's go ahead and wrap up. And Drey, tell us about South Dakota Open Primaries ballot initiative and how people can help.
Well, ideas is very helpful. That's one of the great things about this Zoom. I'm glad this is recorded because I'm sure I missed some things. But I mean, money obviously is important, but we have to figure out how to do this. I don't want to be so dependent upon money. If we can afford and find a way not to be, it's just better. And I hate wasting money on signatures if you don't have to. So anybody has any ideas on how to do things? And tomorrow, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be participating in an open primaries Zoom where different people in states, I think Mike will probably be there. We're going to be talking about, what our initiatives are, try to exchange ideas from what works and what doesn't work and what we need help on. So I think things like this are so important. And it also makes you feel less isolated. I mean, sometimes when you're out there, beating your head, it feels like you're beating your head against the wall. And, these things they're hard. And so it's nice to know that there's other people out here that are doing the same thing and have done it and are doing it. And so I really tip my hat to you guys for putting this on. This is great. And it's inspired me to, if I can be more active with what you guys are doing, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, welcome aboard. I did put the links to South Dakota Open Primaries.org on in the chat, as well as all Oregon votes. I know some other people who are involved in their own organizations have put their stuff on here too. That's all great resource sharing. Michael, tell us about All Oregon Votes and how people can help.
Yeah, well, alloregonvotes.org is our website, and we are pushing full steam ahead. I think one of the takeaways that I got from my group is, how do we push through this sense of fatalism, right? I think sometimes in our modern world today, post-COVID, and looking forward about all the challenges that we face as a people, it can be hard to see that there's hope, that there's light at the end of the tunnel, or that there's going to be a better day ahead. And I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and so I can't be fatalistic. I have to imagine we can build a better future for our kids, and that's what fuels me. And I think everyone needs to find some fuel. So we can either be Eeyores or Tiggers, and I like to surround myself with Tiggers. Certainly there's a lot of Eeyores who are telling me that this doesn't have a chance, right? But I think that just hearing from inspiring people like Katie is such a moral support. And I think that we all have to support each other, right? So we can't all be huge high dollar donors, but we can certainly get together in groups large and small and talk about ways in which we can make our state and our nation function better and be representative and responsive to the needs of its people. And so that's all I'll say. I'm really appreciative for everyone's time tonight.
I appreciate you joining us as well. And Katie, go ahead and tell us about the people and how you can get involved in especially our nice voting rights committee.
Yes, and I wanted to say, one of the things I've done before, I've personally donated to campaigns that aren't in Michigan that support ideas that I like. Nothing huge and not a secret millionaire or anything, but I know that every single individual dollar helps. It helps when you're talking to the media too, when they're asking, do you guys actually have support? It's one thing to have volunteers, but it's a total other to have people who are putting their money behind it. The other thing I do is, when I'm on social media, but I know other people do email or whatever, but even just putting out there like, hey, are any of my friends from South Dakota, or know people who are from South Dakota or from Oregon and know people about Oregon? And then just connecting them and saying, like, did you know that this initiative is going on? I know they have to gather signatures really quickly, or I know they're fighting for this great cause, just wanted to pass on the information. And I've helped give out people who, my friends who do not do this kind of stuff, do not attend awesome webinars on Tuesday nights about redistricting and open primaries and all that, to decide to volunteer or to go and figure out where they can gather signatures. So just, even if you aren't in these states, I think you can still be really effective. And that's what folks need. They have to, all of this is about relationships and relational organizing. And Drey and Michael seem like really wonderful people, but they only know so many folks. And so they need other folks who are willing to then go and remind folks of the important task at hand. And again, none of this happens without actual people showing up, actual people organizing. That's the great and the bad thing about the ballot initiative process. It takes so many people, but that's what's also so cool, is like, that's really how democracy should be, is you should have lots of people bought in to actually making our laws change work. So getting back to the people, we have an amazing voting rights committee that is focused this entire year on ballot initiatives, including how do we get more states to have the ballot initiative process. We've been working a ton in New Hampshire as an example, and had a great poll that we've put out there that actually shows that the vast majority of folks in New Hampshire are really interested in a ballot initiative process, yet they don't have one. So what does that process look like? Even outside of New Hampshire, we want to help folks. The other thing we do is we try to help folks like Drey and Michael use the ballot initiative process if we can be at all helpful, whether helping them think about organizing tips, or seeing if any of the tools we've built can be of assistance, or even trying to connect our volunteers who live in all 50 states to what they're doing. And the other thing I would just say is, like Sarah mentioned at the beginning, this is the National Week of Conversation. There are literally hundreds of organizations trying to hold events like these this week to just get Americans talking. And hopefully what I want is not only talking, but then leading folks to action too. And we've got some great events specifically on how do we reduce gun violence in America, which is a little different for us. We normally just talk about reforms, but we heard over and over again from college students and high school students and everyday folks that this is an issue they want to talk to folks who maybe vote differently than them on. And you can join one of those conversations. And we're really looking forward to figuring out the change we can make together.
Well, I'd just like to say that this has been so valuable. I can't tell you how happy I am to be a part of this and to learn what I've learned tonight. This is great. So kudos to the people and everyone involved for putting this on. This is awesome.
Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much everyone for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. The great conversation, great content, and best of luck for all of your initiatives. And hope you can get everything past the finish line and get successful outcomes in the election. So,
And thanks to David for our smooth move with the middle there.
Yes, thank you, David.
yeah.